This video covers the federal rules of evidence on hearsay, Rules 801 and 803. The hearsay rules exist to protect the jury from hearing a witness testifying in court about the out-of-court statements made by another person. That person is known as the declarant. During this video, I will be referring to 5 individuals. The first is the declarant. The declarant is the person who makes the statement. The second is the witness. The witness is the person who may testify in court about what the declarant said. The proponent is the attorney who is seeking to introduce the declarant's out-of-court statement into evidence by asking the witness questions like, "What did they say?" The opponent is the attorney who is seeking to prevent the proponent from introducing the declarant's out-of-court statements into evidence. For this video, the opponent's opening line is always the same: objection, hearsay. The judge is the officiant who decides if the opponent's hearsay objection will be sustained and the statement is excluded, or overruled and the statement is admitted. Here are the 4 rules this video will cover. We will review each of the rules and then step through a notional courtroom scenario for that rule. The first rule is 801C, definitional hearsay or hearsay defined. On the top of the slide, we see the actual rule. On the bottom of the slide, we see the 3 foundational requirements. These 3 will typically be referred to as an out-of-court statement offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. You will hear these referred to as definitional hearsay or hearsay defined. As a practical matter, they are synonymous. Here is a very basic depiction of how the hearsay rules work during a trial. The proponent asks the witness, "What did they say?" They being an out-of-court declarant. The opponent then responds by standing up and saying, "Objection, hearsay." Typically, the judge will direct the proponent and the opponent to approach the bench where the 3 of them can discuss the matter privately. The opponent will recite the foundational requirements of definitional hearsay. The proponent is attempting to introduce an out-of-court statement that is offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. The proponent will then respond to the opponent's definitional hearsay objection by pivoting to one of 4 options. The first option being, "This is not hearsay defined." In later scenarios, we will see the other 3 options. In this scenario, the proponent is pivoting to, "This is not hearsay defined." This is not being offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. Instead, this is being offered to show the effect on the hearer. Once the proponent has pivoted to not hearsay and the effect on the hearer, the opponent can make a strong counter-argument. Arguments such as, "There is no need for the jury to hear what was said to judge the effect on the hearer." Alternately, the opponent could ask the judge for a Rule 105 limiting instruction to the jury. In this scenario, the opponent's counter-argument was not persuasive enough, and the judge says, "Objection overruled," and the witness is required to answer the question. We can see the quote bubble moves up the ladder, the 801C ladder, and is on its way to the jury. And there it is with the jury. Can't unring that bell. The next scenario is for Rule 801D1, A through C, hearsay exemptions. There's 3 of them. This is also known as the declarant witness's prior statements. This rule is unique because for these 3 exemptions, the declarant is also the witness who is testifying under oath on the stand. This scenario will only cover A, inconsistent statements. Here we see the rule. This scenario starts by the proponent asking the declarant witness, "What did you say?" The "what" being a prior out-of-court statement made by the declarant. The opponent then responds by standing up and saying, "Objection, hearsay." At sidebar, the opponent will recite the foundational requirements of definitional hearsay. The proponent is attempting to introduce an out-of-court statement that is offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. The proponent then responds to the opponent's definitional hearsay objection by pivoting to one of the 4 options. In this scenario, the proponent is pivoting to the second option, the hearsay exemption under Rule 801D1A, declarant witness's prior statement. This exemption is unique because it only applies when the declarant is actually in court and testifying under oath as a witness. The proponent continues by explaining the foundational requirements for the Rule 801D1A. 1. The declarant witness is testifying. 2. The declarant witness is subject to cross-examination. 3. The declarant witness will be testifying about a prior statement. In this scenario, since the opponent does not have a persuasive counterargument, the judge says objection overruled and the declarant witness is required to answer the question about their prior inconsistent statement. And the declarant witness's testimony is on its way to the jury. The declarant witness has been impeached. Later, during closing argument, the proponent gets to call the declarant a liar because of the impeachment. The next slide shows a twist on this scenario. The setup is the same basic scenario, but the important twist occurs when the declarant witness's prior statement was made under oath. The foundational requirements are 1. Defendant testifies, 2. Subject to cross-examination, and 3. About a prior statement made under oath. When this occurs, the proponent gets to use the declarant witness's statement for two things. The first being impeachment. During closing argument, the proponent gets to call the declarant a liar. The second being the proponent gets to use the declarant's previous statement as substantive evidence during closing argument. Here we see the two ladders, one for impeachment and one for substantive evidence. And in the next slide, we see both items with the jury. Let's see how this works in real life by looking at the following case from 2000. In September 2000, NBA star Paul "The Truth" Pierce was stabbed in a late-night dance club in Boston. Shortly after the attack, a woman by the name of Crystal Bostic told people at school and the police that she saw Roscoe Ragland stab Paul Pierce. In order to lock in Crystal Bostic's testimony, the prosecutor called Crystal Bostic to testify before the grand jury. During that 2001 grand jury testimony, Crystal Bostic identified Roscoe Ragland as the individual who stabbed Pierce. In 2002, when called to testify against Roscoe Ragland, Crystal Bostic attempted to change her testimony. This allowed the prosecutor under Rule 801D1A to impeach Crystal Bostic and to still use her 2001 grand jury testimony to convict Roscoe Ragland. Here's a portion of the trial transcript from 2002 when Crystal Bostic was testifying, starting in the middle of the page. Question: did you see how many times he made that motion, that thrusting motion? Question mark. Answer: who? Question: Roscoe. Answer: no, because I didn't see Roscoe with a knife. Question: do you recall me asking that question in the grand jury, ma'am? Question mark. Answer: yeah. Question: in the grand jury, did you see how many times he made that motion, that thrusting motion? Your answer: yeah, repeatedly, just real fast, a lot of times. Did I read that accurately? Answer: yep. Moving to the next slide. Remember, this 2-for-1 special twist can only occur when the following foundational requirements are met. Number 1, the declarant testifies. Number 2, subject to cross-examination about a prior statement made under oath. In the previous slide, Crystal was making that statement under oath to the grand jury in 2001. The next scenario is for Rule 801D2A through E, hearsay exemptions, but better known as statements offered against an opposing party. This scenario will only cover A. Here is the actual rule. 801D2A, hearsay exemption, is for an opposing party statement. In this scenario, the statement is made by a party and offered by a party opponent. This scenario starts by the proponent asks the question, what did they say? They being the party opponent. Next, the opponent then responds by standing up and saying, objection, hearsay. At sidebar, the opponent will recite the foundational requirements of definitional hearsay. The proponent is attempting to introduce an out-of-court statement that is offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. The proponent will then respond to the opponent's definitional hearsay objection by pivoting to the hearsay exemption under Rule 801D2A. A statement is offered against an opposing party. Your Honor, this is not hearsay because it falls under Rule 801D2A, hearsay exemption for an opposing party statement. The first foundational requirement of Rule 801D2A is that it must be a statement made by a party, in this case, the defendant. The second foundational requirement is that the statement must be offered against an opposing party, in this case, offered by the prosecutor against the defendant. Accordingly, the objection should be overruled and the witness should be required to answer the question. In this scenario, the opponent does not have a persuasive counter-argument. The judge says objection overruled and the witness is required to answer the question about the prior statement. Here we see the ladder drop down and the information gets to the jury. The last scenarios look at the first three Rule 803 exceptions to the rules against hearsay. The first is present sense impression. The scenario starts as usual. The proponent asks the witness, what did they say? They being an out-of-court declarant. The opponent then responds by standing up and saying, objection, hearsay. At sidebar, the opponent will recite the foundational requirements of definitional hearsay. The proponent is attempting to introduce an out-of-court statement that is offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. The proponent then responds to the opponent's definitional hearsay argument by pivoting to the fourth option, saying, Your Honor, while this may be hearsay, a Rule 803 exception applies, specifically Rule 803.1, present sense impression. The proponent then lists the three foundational requirements. Present sense impression is a statement describing or explaining an event or condition made while or immediately after the declarant perceived it. In this scenario, the opponent does not have a persuasive counter-argument. The judge says objection overruled and the witness is required to answer the question. The second is excited utterance. The scenario starts as usual. The proponent asks the witness, what did they say? They being the out-of-court declarant. The opponent then responds by standing up and saying objection, hearsay. At sidebar, the opponent will recite the foundational requirements of definitional hearsay. The proponent is attempting to introduce an out-of-court statement that is offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. The proponent will then respond to the opponent's definitional hearsay objection by pivoting to the fourth option, saying, Your Honor, while this may be hearsay, a Rule 803 exception applies, specifically Rule 803.2, excited utterance. The proponent then lists the three foundational requirements. Excited utterance, a statement relating to a startling event or condition made while the declarant under the stress of excitement that it caused. In this scenario, the opponent does not have a persuasive counter-argument, and the judge says objection overruled, and the witness is required to answer the question. The final one is then existing mental, emotional, or physical condition. This scenario starts as usual. The proponent asks the witness, what did they say? They being an out-of-court declarant. The opponent then responds by standing up and saying, objection, hearsay. At sidebar, the opponent will recite the foundational requirements of definitional hearsay. The proponent is attempting to introduce an out-of-court statement that is offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. The proponent will then respond to the opponent's definitional hearsay objection by pivoting to the fourth objection, saying, Your Honor, while this may be hearsay, a Rule 803 exception applies, specifically Rule 803.3, then existing mental, emotional, or physical condition. The proponent then lists the three foundational requirements. 1, declarant's then existing state of mind, such as motive, intent, or plan, or emotional, sensory, or physical condition, such as mental feeling, pain, or bodily health. In this scenario, the opponent does not have a persuasive counterargument. The judge says objection overruled and the witness is required to answer the question. This Rule 803.3 state of mind exception is different than the state of mind that we discussed earlier in Rule 801C. The Rule 801C state of mind is inferred because the statement is not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. In Rule 803.3 exception, state of mind is not inferred because the witness is allowed to testify about what the declarant actually said, and it is for the truth of the matter asserted. These are the 4 rules we covered in the video. Having a thorough understanding of the foundational requirement for each of the rules is key because that is the battleground after the pivot. Please let me know if you have any questions, comments, or corrections. Thank you for watching.